Welcome to Wide Angle. Prime Minister Modi has just returned from his first multilateral summit, the BRICS Summit from Brazil. To discuss the outcome and what it means, does this summit, which is a new cycle, does this indicate the emergence of a new world order? In the studios tonight, we have Dr. Bhagwati, RBI Chair, Professor at ICRIER, Indrani Bagchi, Diplomatic Editor, Times of India, and W.P.S. Sidhu from Brookings, India. Let me start with you, Dr. Bhagwati. BRICS or BRIC was a term that was coined as an acronym in 2001 by investment banker in Goldman Sachs. And the first summit took place in 2009. It took 8 years from what was essentially an investment banker's term to gain a political content in the form of the first BRICS summit. Do you think we are moving forward to a new stage today?
No, I would think that not only are we moving to a new stage, I think this is groundbreaking in terms of what this summit has been able to achieve. And I'm particularly impressed. I'm sure during the discussion we'll get into the political aspects of what has happened. But on the economic front, I can tell you that my sense is that whether it is the new development bank, whether it is the contingency reserve arrangement, Exim Bank, statistical commissions to cooperate with each other on the trade front, I'll stop. But it is very impressive what has been achieved in this recent summit.
Indrani, you have been writing about this, reporting on different BRICS summits for a number of years. How do you rate this?
Well, this is certainly a sort of a watershed moment, because I think they begin a new cycle of summits after this, which is it's also a new political arrangement, because in the run up to this current this current summit, the discussion was mainly about the bank. Now that we've got that behind us, it will be interesting to see how these 5 nations cooperate on both developing the bank and using the bank for their own development.
WPS, from a strategic perspective, I mean, the G7 has always been the driving economic force, and which has metamorphosed slowly into the G20. So, from a strategic perspective, where does BRICS fit in?
I find it supremely ironic that it was really a bastion of Western liberal economic order which suggested the idea of BRICS, and
yes,
BRICS is perceived as an anti-Western institution, which is clearly not the case, because it really shows that there is a model that people want to aspire to, but not everybody can join that.
No, but just raising one minute for the benefit of our viewers, BRIC was a term which was coined by Goldman Sachs investment banker Jim O'Neill in 2001, more as attractive investment destination.
Correct.
These 4 countries.
Correct.
And gradually it developed a political role, as it were, and which is when the first summit took place.
Right.
But go ahead.
Precisely the point that you made, and the comparison with G7, G8 is very relevant, because if you look at the history of G7, G8, it took much longer for them to move from becoming an economic grouping to a political one. Whereas in the case of BRIC and then BRICS, it actually happened very, very quickly. And even the choice of South Africa, one could argue, is probably more political than economic. One could argue that case, but I think it's going to be
it would be difficult to ignore a huge continent like Africa.
Exactly, but the question is, there are other contenders in Africa, but one could argue that South Africa is a strong case because it's the only African country in the G20. So, we can certainly make that case there. But certainly I think the BRICS is probably a good start, and the question remains whether this is going to remain with the 5, or is this really going to become the new G7 or the G8, in which case the question is, who are the other 3?
Let me come back to another issue here, Dr. Bhagwati. We were talking about the G7. Now, G7, we can see certain commonalities in the sense that these are developed economies, mature democracies, all of them members of political alliance and so on. Whereas we see a fair amount of divergence when it comes to the BRICS. I mean, we see 2 countries that are members of the Security Council and 3 which want to be members of the Security Council. We see 3 nuclear weapon states, and we see 2 countries that have voluntarily given up their nuclear programs or nuclear weapon programs. In economic terms, I mean, look at leading in terms of per capita GNP. You have on one hand countries at $11,000–12,000 per capita, and China at around 7,500 per capita, and India at the end at about 1,200–1,400 per capita. So the divergence in terms of size, economics, political ideologies, etc., is pretty large. So what is the glue that will hold it together?
I think a desire to form partnerships from which they have been excluded in the past. Take the case of the particular paragraph on IMF in the summit document, where it's fairly firm language. I'm trying to be diplomatic here, where they suggest to IMF that they shouldn't miss the revised deadline of January 2015 for the revision of the quotas. But your point is very well taken, that the political systems, again, to be delicate about it, are not quite the same, nor are they developed.
They are not aligned in a same kind of coherent manner.
They don't converge. But I think the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. And the new development bank, funnily, even though it is going to be a bank, a development bank, as was being discussed a minute back just before the program started, will lending have any political or environmental constraints as the current multilateral development banks do? For instance, will there be any problem about lending to a project in Arunachal Pradesh? Will there be a problem, as there was for the Sardar Sarovar Dam, where the World Bank shied away because NGOs, environmental NGOs, they had reservations? And this is not just outside the country, but also within. So your point is well taken, but my sense is, let's reserve judgment, because the print media around the world has been quick to jump on this particular point and say, well, this grouping will never work. And in fact, some less than well-informed criticism coming even from domestic sources about how money will be transferred to Shanghai. I just want to say this for the sake of those viewers.
Let me just ask you first to tell us about the size of the bank that is being set up. And there was one very important demand which India had, which is that all members of BRICS must have equal equity participation, so that they are all equal partners, because there was a general apprehension that China, with its booming economy, with its largest stock of reserves, could very easily dominate the institution if everybody was not given equal rights. And this was also something which is very different from what exists in existing international financial institutions like the World Bank or the IMF. So the size and the structure of the new institution that is planned, could you tell us a little bit about that? And then we will come to its infrastructure lending and the priorities that it would have.
Sure. You know, the subscribed capital base as it is currently envisaged is 50 billion. So each country, as you pointed out, has 1/5 of the equity share, so 10 billion each. But I must hasten to clarify for those viewers who feel that 10 billion will be transferred to the bank, that the usual
in Shanghai,
the usual model for multilateral development banks is for only a small fraction of the capital. It could be 20%, it could be 10%, which will be paid up. The rest is callable. And based on that, the institution issues bonds, and the proceeds of which are lent out. So the time frame that is being thought of is that this bank should be up and running in 2 years. So I think a lot of work and a lot of light will be shed in these coming 2 years.
Indrani, an Indian is going to head the bank in its first few years, 6 years, I think. And I'm told that that was the subject of considerable negotiations, where the bank should be headquartered, who should lead it first, and so on. Can you throw some light on that?
Yes, well, I think it was with the previous UPA government, I think, who agreed to the headquarters being located in Shanghai. I think the Chinese made a fairly persuasive case, and New Delhi's case was not nearly as persuasive as the Chinese. I think we should also understand that this bank will by necessity be dominated by China, and we should not shy away from that, because it will. Where it is headquartered is will have a bearing on who is appointed to positions that control the way the bank functions. And I think, but I think, you know, we'll have to accept that, because as you pointed out very correctly, the BRICS arrangement is interesting, because the four countries are not quite as large as China by itself, and
True.
therefore that particular disparity will always be there. Having said that, as Germany said some time ago, in the IMF, India has a 2.4% voting share. The US has 17%, and we are okay with that. So, will we be okay with the Chinese dominated bank? I reserve judgment, because we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out. As for the Indian,
Please go ahead. No.
No, as for the Indian heading it, well, you know, I think it's a big deal for the finance ministry.
Yeah.
Who are the finance ministry key people who speak Chinese? W.P.S.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I want to pick up on a point that Indrani made here. And really, I mean, I think, you know, let's put politics aside for a minute, right? If we were all investors and we wanted to set up a world-class bank, where would you go? You know, just by sheer infrastructure, etc., I think there's no doubt that Shanghai is head and shoulders over anyone else, whether we like it or not. You know, and I think thereby hangs the tail. The issue of the president, I think, is an interesting consolation prize, but not one that necessarily India should harp on. After all, can we really remember who was the first president of the World Bank or even the IMF? You know, I think it's more important as to what kind of contributions India is able to make to the bank, not just in terms of capital, but in terms of its approach and structure. And I think those are more crucial.